Hello and welcome to the third and last video of my Christmas series. If you're new here, my name is Candace and I make sewing and DIY videos. And in this series, I'm showing you 10 easy gifts you can sew in under 30 minutes. And we did 4 projects in the first 2 videos and you can find them here. So we're gonna do the last 6 in this one today. I had meant to have all of these videos posted by like early December, but that just didn't end up being feasible for me with how busy it is with the kids and the holidays and everything being kind of hectic. But if you are still looking for gifts to sew, you definitely still have time to make these ones because they are all really fast. If you're a complete beginner, they probably will take you longer than 30 minutes, but a lot of them are really small in size. And if you've sewn a few things before, they really shouldn't take you too long. So I know there's only a week left till Christmas, but if you still want to sew gifts, these ones will be perfect for you. I'm going to give you the pattern piece dimensions and do a step-by-step sew along in this video for each project. I've also created a PDF download that includes all 10 patterns for $10, so $1 a pattern, and it includes printable pattern piece templates that you can print at home and cut out and use to cut out your fabric, and also illustrated step-by-step instructions. And there is one project today where I can't really give you dimensions because they are different shapes, the felt ornaments, and in the PDF download I think there's like 5 to 7 different pattern pieces. So those are there, or you can also freehand them if you want to. So without further ado, let's get started. The first gift we're gonna make are these hot pads. And here is the pattern template. I think I'm gonna actually separate these because this inner line is for the batting and the outer line is for the main fabric. So in the actual PDF, they'll be separate pieces. You're gonna need a decent sized piece of scrap fabric. These squares are 8 inches by 8 inches roughly, and you need a little bit extra for the hang tab. And you're gonna wanna use woven fabric that is a natural fiber. So cotton or linen also works. You don't wanna use anything synthetic because you're gonna be putting hot stuff on it and it could melt it. So let's get our pattern pieces cut out. Here are all my pieces cut out. I have 2 main pieces, 1 piece of batting. I would actually recommend 2 if you're doing cotton batting, and my hang tab piece. This is optional, but I'm going to be quilting mine and I'm just using vertical lines that are spaced 1 inch apart. And I'm just marking these on one of the main pieces with a water-soluble fabric marker. I love these ones and I get them on Amazon and they're linked in my store if you're interested. And next we're going to just place the batting on the wrong side of the fabric and clip it or pin it together, and then we're going to quilt our lines on. So you'll just sew down all the lines that you marked, and I like to use a 3mm stitch for quilting. So I have my batting and my main piece quilted together. This is what it should look like. And I forgot to mention, make sure your batting is also a natural fiber. This one is a cotton batting. And now we're going to sew the hang tab. Here's my little hang tab piece. It is cut on the bias, and we're gonna press the long edges in and then fold it one more time, and it's gonna create a little tab. Then we'll take our tab piece and fold it in half and place it in one corner and pin and baste it in place. Once you've done that, you'll take your other main piece and place it right sides together, pin around the edges, and sew with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, leaving a 2-inch gap on one side. It can be a little tricky to sew the rounded edges of this hot pad, especially if you're a beginner, so just lift your presser foot and pivot with your needle down, and that will help you sew a nice rounded seam. Next, we'll trim the seam allowance at the corners, and then we'll turn it to the right side through the gap that we left on one side. Use a chopstick or a pen to poke out the corners, and then we're going to press it nice and flat before we give it a final top stitch. And just make sure that the seam allowance at the gap is tucked in nicely so that we can top stitch it closed. And lastly, I like to top stitch it 1/16 inch away from the edge, but if you find that a little bit too finicky, you can do 1/8 of an inch or even 1/4 if you want. And that is it, your hot pad is done. I think these make such a great practical gift. And while I love this Christmas pattern, I also really love making this in a like elevated striped linen print, something very Anthropologie-esque. And you can also pair it with a pair of oven mitts and maybe some like kitchen utensils or something like that. And it makes such a great gift. The next project we're gonna make is scrunchies. I make these whenever I have leftover fabric because they take a pretty small amount and they're just really useful. At home, I always have my hair up with my kids and stuff like that. And also when I do heatless curls, I like to use them. But I have 3 sizes in the PDF. There's a kid size, a regular size, and this jumbo size, which is my favorite. I really like making these out of satin scraps because they're really soft and like slippery. They don't snag on your hair. But my favorite are these organza ones. I think these ones are so beautiful and delicate. There are a few different ways that you can sew scrunchies, but this is my personal favorite way. I think it's just the most straightforward and easy to understand for beginners. So that is the method I'm going to show you. And we're going to be making a jumbo scrunchie out of this fabric. This is an embroidered floral tulle, I think. I wanted to make a gown with it, but I just haven't gotten around to it because that's a big project, but maybe in the springtime, because when I pulled this out, I was like immediately inspired. We're gonna take a small piece of it to make a scrunchie today, and I think it's gonna be so pretty in this fabric. And here are the dimensions. The jumbo size is 25 by 9 inches, the regular is 22.5 by 4 inches, and the kid size is 14 by 4 inches. So to sew this, we're going to fold it in half so the long edges are touching and they're right sides together. Then we'll sew along that top edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, leaving a gap of about 2 inches in the middle. Next, we'll turn our scrunchie to the right side through the gap that we left in the middle. Then, starting at one of the short ends, we're going to turn it back to the wrong side, but we're going to stop when we're about halfway and match up our raw edges and seam allowance and pin and sew around that little tube with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I find it easiest to sew this with the presser foot inside the tube, which I'll show here in the video in a second because it's such a small area to sew. Next, we'll turn the scrunchie back to the right side through the gap that we left in the middle. And then we're going to thread our elastic through. For a jumbo scrunchie, I recommend about 9 inches of 1/4 inch elastic, but you can compare that to your favorite elastics and decide what length you want to do. Then you'll thread the elastic through the scrunchie using a safety pin, and when you get to the end, bring it out of the gap and overlap the ends of the elastic by 1/2 inch to 1 inch and sew them together with a zigzag stitch. Then the last thing to do is close up the gap that we left, and for this one I'm going to use a slip stitch and do it by hand because the scrunchie is sheer, but you can also top stitch this. It's just a little bit more visible if you do it that way. And that is it. She's done. I love how this turned out, and now I want to make more, but I also want to save that fabric for a dress. I think it's gorgeous, and especially in this jumbo size, it's definitely a statement piece. So yeah, make some scrunchies. The next project we're going to make is needle books. In the pattern, there are printable pieces for the cover and for the pages. And I've also included a little heart page if you want to do that. You can make them all rectangles if you want. This is really up to you. And there are so many ways that you can customize this one, which I really love. So I'm going to start with my cover. So you'll notice on this piece, there's a little marking for a button and also a notch for where to sew your elastic to. And you can choose any button you want. You can use one this size or you can use a bigger one, but just make sure to measure the piece of elastic that you're gonna use around the button so you know how long to make it. So for this project, you can use felt and blanket stitch it, but I'm gonna show you how you can use fabric and sew it. And for this one, I wanted to use up some of my favorite floral scraps. I don't do a lot of quilting, but I'm really getting into it. And I have all these beautiful scraps that I wanted to use up. So I cut 1.5 inch strips and sewed them all with a 1/4 inch seam allowance to create this for the cover. I think this is going to be so pretty. So I've used some fusible fleece to the back to give it some structure since this is going to be the cover. And for the other side, you need 2 pieces. I'm going to use this thrifted bed sheet. It's this really cute gray gingham. And I'm going to sew these together, right sides together, all the way around the edge using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to leave a little gap on one side to turn it to the right side. But before we do that, we have to choose a button and cut some elastic. So I'm choosing one of these vintage buttons that I inherited from a family friend, and you can use any size. You don't have to use the size that's in the pattern, but just make sure you measure the right amount of elastic. So you want to make sure the elastic can fit around the button and then also has 1/2 inch extra on each side for seam allowance. So you'll create a little loop with your elastic and pin it at the notch on one of the short sides. And then you're going to place your pieces right sides together and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around the edge, leaving a 2 to 3 inch gap on one side. Once that's sewn, we'll trim off the excess seam allowance along every edge except for the one that we have left the gap on, and also trim the corners at a diagonal. And then we're going to flip it to the right side. I like to leave the seam allowance where the gap was because that makes it easier to press it in and top stitch it. But you're going to want to poke the corners out with a chopstick, and then we're going to press it flat and top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Top stitching is going to close that gap that we left, and it's also going to give it a really nice finish. And if you have trouble sewing this at the corners, you can use a hump jumper or something else to lift up the presser foot, because it can get tricky because it's pretty bulky. So here's what my cover looks like. This is going to be the front and this is the back. I still have to sew the button on, but I'll do that last. So the elastic will come over and close like that. And now I'm going to make the pages. So each of the page pieces, once you sew them together and sew them into the book, they're going to give you 4 single sides, right? So like if you can imagine inside the book, once you sew it, and you'll have this side, this side, this side, this side. So you actually don't really need that many page pieces. Otherwise it's going to get pretty bulky. I think I'm going to do just the 1 page. So that'll give me 2 pages and 4 sides. And then I'm also going to make the heart page, which will sit in the middle because I think that's really cute. So I'm just using some linen cotton scraps that I have from a dress. So I'm going to sew these exactly the same way as the cover, right sides together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, leaving a gap, turn it to the right side and top stitch. My hair is getting progressively fuzzier. I have my pieces sewn now. I added this little piece of trim here and I just sewed it with a straight stitch. And I tried to keep it along the top stitching on the back of the cover so that it isn't too noticeable. But I added this to place safety pins on. And then this is the inside page. And I added a piece of scrap wool coating and I just did a straight stitch through it to slot needles in there. And then this side, I made a tiny little pocket. I'm not really sure what will fit in here. I was planning on putting like a little embroidery floss in there because this is for my sister-in-law who does collage embroidery. You should check her stuff out, it's amazing. I also added this decorative bow top stitching, which is so cute. And so it'll go like this in the book, and then I'll place my little heart on top and top stitch it down in the middle. And then I just have to add the button and it'll be done. I'm super happy with how this turned out. I think it's so adorable and it's a really great way to keep track of your needles. I would absolutely love to get this as a gift. I think it's so thoughtful and super useful because whenever I'm carrying needles with me, I never have a proper way to store them and end up losing them everywhere, which is not ideal and also dangerous. I think if I make this again, I will plan out the pockets a little bit better in advance. I kind of just winged it and went with it, but you could sew the pockets on before you sew the pages right sides together so that there isn't visible stitching. The same with this little coating scrap that I made into like a bar for the needles. I could have added that on the front and the back pages too, but I didn't want to stitch over the pockets and stuff like that. So in the future, I will plan this a little bit better. I also saw some really cute ideas on Pinterest where you could make a little pocket for scissors or add a little fabric strap with like a snap on it to hook on different things like measuring tapes or anything like that. So you can really customize this to whatever you want. That is the needle book. The next project we're going to make is reusable cotton rounds. So this is a great reusable option if you use cotton rounds to remove your makeup. I keep a little stack of these in a cup on my counter in my bathroom, and I use them with like micellar water to take off my makeup. I just throw them in the wash with the rest of my laundry, and they're so handy to have. And they're really easy and fast to make as well because they're tiny. So if you purchase the pattern from me, it comes with a little template. It's just a circle that is 2.5 inches in diameter. I like to use scraps of double gauze for these. I think that that is like the softest and the best for makeup removal, but you could also use flannel or any other soft fabric that you have. If you're using a thinner fabric, I would use 2 layers, and if you have a thicker fabric, I would just use 1. But basically, we're just gonna use this template to cut out a bunch of circles, and I'm gonna serge all the edges. And if you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch instead.
Making our Christmas memories. I've been working so much lately, I can barely find the time to sleep. Yeah, I spend my time running around, keeping people pleased. But this is my favorite holiday. It's a chance to start over new. 'Cause I miss you so I'm letting go of everything but you. These are the good times with you. Baby, this year it's just gonna be you and me. Hang by the fire and chill. Isn't this how it's supposed to be? Making our Christmas memories. Oh, and I've been longing to hold you close. Forget about everyone else. Isn't this how it's supposed to be? Making our Christmas memories. Oh, oh. La, 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 oh, oh. La, 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 oh, oh. La, 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 la. Making our Christmas memories. I've been wrapping presents for you. I've been hanging marbles in the tree. And I've lit my house with Christmas lights, so you should come back home to me.
The next project we're going to make is cord keepers. These keep your cords nice and tidy, and they're great for travel. They use a really small amount of fabric, and my PDF template includes 3 different shapes for these, but you're going to need main fabric, interfacing, and some snaps and a snap setter. I'm making the circular one today, and it is a 4-inch wide circle. So the first thing we're going to do is apply our interfacing. I'm using 1 piece because mine is pretty stiff, but if you have a lighter weight interfacing, you can interface both main pieces. And you're going to place your interfacing on the wrong side of your fabric and press well until it's adhered. Then you're going to take your 2 main pieces and place them right sides together, and we're going to sew it together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, but you're going to leave a gap of 1 to 2 inches. Then we'll cut off the excess seam allowance, but I leave the seam allowance where the gap is. Otherwise, it gets too tricky to fold it in and press it because we need to close this gap with top stitching. We'll turn it to the right side through the gap that we left and make sure to poke it out so the seam is nice and flat. Then we'll fold the seam allowance in and give it a really good press. And the last thing to do is top stitch it all the way around the edge. So I top stitch about a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge, all the way around, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And lastly, we're just gonna add on our snaps. So I'm using this snap setter that I have. I just got this on Amazon and it was pretty cheap and it doesn't work that well. So I don't really recommend this one. I think the heavy duty ones are better, but it does work with a little bit of elbow grease. And once both of your snaps are on, that is it. It's ready to be used. I really like these for organizing the cords in my kitchen or organizing cords when I'm traveling. I think they're super helpful in keeping everything nice and tidy. The last project we're going to make is these felt cookie ornaments. The templates for these ornaments can be found in my PDF download. There are 6 shapes in the pattern, but you can totally just freehand shapes if you want. Just make sure your icing piece is a little bit smaller than your cookie piece. And for this project, you're going to need felt, a needle, embroidery thread, and bugle beads or seed beads. So once you have your pieces cut out, you're going to take one brown piece and your white piece and lay the white one on top. And then we're going to stitch this on. I use a whip stitch, but you could use a blanket stitch or a running stitch, whatever you want. I'm actually going to use my sewing machine on this today because it's faster. And then once this is sewn on, we're going to add the sprinkle beads. If you want to hand sew the icing on instead, here is how I do a whip stitch. Tie a knot in your thread and then bring your needle up from the back to the front about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the white felt, and then bring the needle to the back directly above where you came out from. And that is our first stitch. And we're just going to repeat this. So for the second stitch, you'll bring your needle from the back to the front 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom of the first stitch you created. Then we'll bring the needle from the front to the back directly above where we just came out of. And we'll just keep on repeating this until the whole thing is sewn on. And these are the beads that I'm going to use. They're silver lined bugle beads, and I got these on Amazon and I have linked them in my Amazon store. And I've separated some embroidery thread. I'm using 1 strand just because the beads have a pretty small hole. And I also just checked that my needle is able to pass through the beads. Make sure you test that. If the needle is too big and you try to force the bead over, it's gonna break because these are made of glass. I've tied a double knot in the end of my thread, and I'm just gonna start at maybe like the bottom edge, and you'll go through from the bottom to the front, and you'll choose 1 bead, thread it into your needle, and then it will be a little bit like this. And whatever direction you want the bead to face, like your sprinkle to go, that's where you're gonna re-enter into the felt cookie. So I like that angle for this one. So I'm just gonna place my needle back in. It's focusing on my face. And pull it tight. And that's the first one done. So for the next ones, you're just gonna bring the needle back from the back to the front where you want the next sprinkle to start. Place another bead on top. And whatever direction you want it to go, just bring your needle back to the back like so. So here's my piece with all the beaded sprinkles on top. I think it looks so cute. I really like the bugle beads because they look like actual sprinkles, but I've also made one with seed beads and they also really look nice. So you can do a mixture or you can do just one. It is totally up to you. And now we're just gonna take our 2 cookie pieces, place them together and sew a blanket stitch. And for the blanket stitch, I use 3 strands of embroidery thread because I like it to be a little bit thicker for the edges. And we're gonna go all the way around, but leave a 2-inch gap so that we can stuff it with some scraps. I like to clip my pieces together to hold them in place while I sew, but you will thread your needle and tie a double knot at the end. And then we're gonna bring it through just the top cookie. So enter from the back to the front, just through the top felt piece. And this will make sure the knot is hidden. Then we'll bring the needle from back to front through the same spot, but through both layers this time. Don't pull the thread too tight because we have to bring the needle back through this loop. So we're gonna bring the needle through this loop from right to left and then pull it taut. To create the next stitch, we'll bring the needle from back to front through both layers, 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom of the first stitch. And don't pull it too tight again because we're going to bring the needle back through this loop from right to left, and then we can pull it taut. And we will just repeat this all the way along. If you run out of thread, I like to just tie a little knot on the last stitch and anchor it, and then I leave a little tail and just push that inside of the ornament to hide it. Then when I start with a new piece of thread, I do the same thing as before. I bring it from back to front just through the first layer with a knot at the end, and then we're going to create that first vertical stitch by bringing the needle back through the same hole but through both layers. And then I'll bring the needle from right to left through that stitch I made and the last stitch, and that's going to create that top blanket type stitch. And then we'll just bring it from left to right through that stitch we first made and pull it tight, and then we can continue on as normal. One thing I forgot to mention is don't start at the very top where you want to put the hanger for your ornament. So start somewhere else and go almost all the way around, but leave a little gap where we can add some stuffing in, and also where we can add a little piece of ribbon or something to hang the ornament. I'm going to use a little piece of ribbon for my hanger, so I have probably like 6 inches of ribbon, and I'm going to fold it in half and just place it at the top of the ornament in between both of the felt pieces. And then we can just continue blanket stitching as if the ribbon is not there. So you'll just go through the ribbon when you would have just gone around both pieces of felt, and that will secure it. When you have just about 2 inches left to stitch, make sure to leave that open, and you can grab your stuffing to stuff inside the ornament. I'm using fabric scraps here and like offcuts from the actual felt to stuff it. And you want to make sure everything is in the right place before you close it up, because it's hard to move the stuffing once it's closed. And once it looks how you want it to look, you can close up the gap with blanket stitches, and when you get to the very end, you can anchor your thread to one of the stitches and just tie a knot, and you can hide the tail inside of the ornament with a pair of tweezers. You can use some water to get rid of the fabric marker, and that is it. Your ornament is done. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that these gift ideas gave you some inspiration for your own Christmas gift sewing. If you make any of them, please tag me on Instagram or TikTok so that I can see. This is probably going to be the last video of the year, so I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed and commented and liked my videos. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Your support means so much to me, especially since I have switched over to doing this full time, and it's just amazing how this little community has grown, and I am just loving making YouTube videos, so I plan to make lots more next year. I hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year, and I will see you in 2025. Bye!